Coming up on this episode of Colonial Crossfire, Democrats cross the Rubicon on impeachment. Tension in Syria erupts, triggered by the president's actions. And the Dem field heats up with a record-stunning 12 candidates on stage. Joining us on the left, Charlie Panfil and Tara Zick. And on the right, Diego Revelar and Patrick Berland. And I'm your moderator, Michael Schnell. From the GWTV studios in Washington, D.C., this is Colonial Crossfire. Hello, GW political junkies. Thank you so much for tuning into this episode of Colonial Crossfire. Now, since the last time we were on the airwaves, a lot has happened here in Washington. For starters, and on the minds of all Americans, and quite frankly in the headlines of all mainstream media, Democrats took the impeachment plunge, opening up an official inquiry into President Trump. The catalyst? A whistleblower report outlining a particular phone call between President Trump and President Volodymyr Zelensky of Ukraine. Now we'll outline those specifics shortly. And in a stunning move, President Trump withdrew American troops from northern Syria, prompting unrest between Turkish and Kurdish forces, some sanctions, a quote-unquote pause, all wrapped together in a nice and pretty ceasefire bow. Details ahead. And of course, what's an episode of Crossfire without some 2020 talk? Earlier this month, 12 Democratic candidates took the debate stage in Westerville, Ohio, and at times, things certainly got intense. However, before we dive into those conversations, let's turn things over to Jessica Nix to fill us in on some headlines you may have missed. Jessica?
Thanks, Michael. Donald Trump recently described his impeachment inquiry as a, quote, lynching in a tweet on the morning of October 22nd. Throughout the impeachment process thus far, Trump has used critical and offensive rhetoric, but this was the first instance of bringing up the country's racial history. During Bill Clinton's impeachment, Joe Biden called the inquiry a, quote, partisan lynching. He has since apologized for his 1998 comments after criticizing Trump for his recent tweet. The United Kingdom is set to leave the European Union on October 31st. Currently, the divided parliament has not passed any of the deals from Prime Minister Boris Johnson. Johnson has also broken his promise of not asking for a Brexit extension from the EU. Hoping for a swifter Brexit, Johnson has proposed a quid pro quo for Parliament. Agree to back a general election vote on the issue in December, and members of Parliament would get more time to deliberate on a Brexit deal. Johnson hopes a general election vote will relieve the deadlock on the issue, but going to voters is a risky move for both parties. September brought an inconclusive election in Israel. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu was unable to build a coalition from the right-wing Likud party. So Benny Gantz of the Blue and White Party has been asked to build a coalition in the next 28 days. Gantz is a more moderate alternative to Netanyahu, and if he is able to build a coalition, he will be prime minister. A party needs 61 seats in the 120-seat parliament to form a government. If Gantz fails, Israel will go into its third election this year. Mark Zuckerberg testified on October 22nd in front of the House Financial Services Committee with the intent to defend Libra, Facebook's cryptocurrency project. He faced intense bipartisan questioning about financial regulation and the economic downsides of creating a new cryptocurrency that could potentially rival U.S. currency. Zuckerberg promised not to let the project move forward without any approval from U.S. financial regulators. This questioning came amid bipartisan antitrust hearings surrounding the Facebook company. Back to you, Michael.
Thanks, Jessica. Now, it seems like Democrats have been calling for President Trump's impeachment since like the day after he was elected. Well, this month, Madam Speaker Pelosi took the plunge. Our student panel is here to discuss this and more. Joining us on the left, Charlie Panfil, a sophomore from Toledo, Ohio, majoring in political science. Charlie is currently the finance director of the GW College Democrats and the executive director of the Friends of Intelligent Democracy PAC. And Tara Zick, a sophomore from Portland, Oregon, studying public health. Tara is the policy director for Friends of Intelligent Democracy and is the former national director of engagement for a women's public health nonprofit. And on the right, Diego Revelar, a senior from Novi, Michigan, majoring in political science. Diego is the co-executive director of GW's Young America's Foundation. And Patrick Berland, a sophomore from Woodbridge, Connecticut, majoring in political science. Patrick is the secretary of the GW College Republicans. Thank you all for joining us this morning.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Now, on September 24th, after weeks of whispers around Capitol Hill and speculation throughout Washington, Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi called for an official impeachment inquiry into President Trump, citing his conversation with a foreign president as a violation of the Constitution. The phone conversation in the spotlight is with President Zelensky of Ukraine. On September 26th, a whistleblower report was unclassified for the public, the whistleblower writing that he or she heard from other officials that President Trump urged President Zelensky to open an investigation into Joe and Hunter Biden, specifically the Ukrainian energy company Burisma, the one in which Hunter Biden sat on the board of. Now, in response to this account, Pelosi called the president's actions a, quote, betrayal of his oath of office, betrayal of our national security, betrayal of the integrity of our elections. As of this morning, 228 representatives support impeachment, 227 congressional Democrats, and one lone Republican, that's Representative Justin Amash from Michigan, who became an overnight sensation after announcing his support for impeachment earlier this year. More than 90 of those Democrats decided to back the inquiry after revelations regarding the president's conversation with the Ukrainian president emerged. Now remember, only 218 House members are needed to impeach a president. So the question is, why doesn't Speaker Pelosi get the ball rolling and call for an official vote? Republicans on the Hill are pushing for this, the president's top allies are pushing for this, and the president himself is pushing for this. In fact, the president has vowed not to participate in the inquiry unless a formal vote is called. But earlier this month, Pelosi took the podium again, telling the American people, quote, there's no requirement that we have a vote and that they're already entrenched in an inquiry. So a vote isn't necessary. Now, since then, the investigation ball has been rolling, with hours of depositions every day, opening statements being leaked, lots of tweets from the president, and even some protests by congressmen in the Capitol. Now, clearly, there's a lot to discuss here, so let's get started. The first question I want to go to is going to be Charlie. And Charlie, my question is, do you think Speaker Pelosi was correct in calling for an impeachment inquiry, and do you think she should have held a formal vote?
House Republicans and House Democrats have both agreed to the rules of the House, which don't require an impeachment vote, which I think is important. And I think that, Madam Speaker is just doing her job, right? The job of Congress, when we have, the separation of powers and checks and balances is to, check the executive branch when it's making a mistake, right? And I think that we've seen consistently from the Trump administration a line of issues, whether they're legal, ethical, or moral, that it is the job of Congress to investigate. And I think, you have multiple committees involved that are all just, they're working within the purview of their committee, which is how this system is supposed to work. And I hope that, I think that President Trump deserves the same due process that Nixon and Bill Clinton were offered. And at the same time, I think that means he needs to cooperate with the investigation.
Republican, do you want to respond to that?
I mean, obviously, the impeachment train has been going since the day he got elected. I mean, this is not a new thing. I think that some transparency would be much appreciated for all of the Americans trying to find out what's going on with their government. I mean,
transparency in what way?
Well, I mean, these committee-only sessions do not allow representatives from outside of those committees who will still have to vote on these things to watch the depositions and the testimony. So I think it's very unwise that, I'll say it, the Republicans were wrong when they passed the rules package back under Speaker Boehner that prohibited those not on the Judiciary Committee from hearing testimony relevant to the Judiciary Committee, because in the end, my representative would have to vote on that, and she does not sit on the Judiciary Committee. And so I think that's a grave mistake to proceed with this. Just because we passed it 4 years ago doesn't mean we have to abide by a system that doesn't promote transparency.
So just last week, the top U.S. diplomat in Ukraine, Bill Taylor, he gave quite the scathing opening testimony supplementing the whistleblower report, essentially outlining that President Trump asked his closest allies to withhold funding to Ukraine that was approved by Congress. Until the government opened up an investigation into Burisma, into Hunter, into Joe Biden. So in recent weeks, President Trump has traded his no collusion comeback to no quid pro quo. Now, some background, quid pro quo is a Latin phrase. Essentially, it means something for something. So my question here is, do you think there was a quid pro quo? In the whistleblower report, the official does outline the president's urging Ukrainian officials, urging his administration not to give the congressional approved funding until Burisma was was investigated. This was supplemented in Bill Taylor's opening statement. So what do you think it's valid? Do you think that this would be enough to investigate the president? Or do you think it's simply misunderstood as a partisan situation?
Well, it certainly deserves investigation. It is certainly troubling that any American president of any party would seek foreign help in any sort of election matter, and that they would, hold aid contingent on it, especially in an area of the world which is so fragile, so subject to Russian influence increasingly. So it does need to be investigated, that is for sure. But I think the important thing is not to jump to conclusions, as we've seen, again, like since he was elected. There are people who thought the Mueller report was going to end up having a bombshell, and that was going to be, automatic impeachment. So I think the one thing to caution is there has been a lot of very troubling details that have started to kind of emerge from the early testimony. But again, unfortunately, because of the very closed, untransparent nature of these proceedings, we're not sure how much there is left out there, how much of the full picture we're getting. So I think the most important thing is for, not just members of Congress, but all Americans to kind of just sit back and let the process unfold, let the oversight happen, and then once there is a final report or determination, see where we go from there. But we shouldn't be jumping the gun and, going out there like some of these members are on TV, like, oh, we got him this time. This is it. Like, some of these members that have already, since Election Day, been looking for ways to get Trump out of office.
Tara, what are your thoughts?
My thoughts are, I think that we keep discussing the fact that, we've been trying to impeach him since day one. He has a pattern of this behavior, and therefore, why is this different? And I think that going about the procedures the way we are now, really looking from an inquiry perspective into his actions with the Ukraine, I think is a way of providing accountability for all of his actions in the past as well. And so I think that even though we talk about them as if they've passed and they're irrelevant, I think that his history as president of inappropriate foreign affairs needs to be accounted for in the way we approach the Ukraine situation.
Interesting.
There is a big difference between inappropriate and impeachable, and that is the big thing, is that I feel like there are some Democrats who, Trump has had some very questionable and sometimes just wrong decision-making and statements. That doesn't mean it rises to the level of impeachment, which is a very, very serious move to take to remove a sitting president that was elected by the United States people. You have to make the determination. Has he done things that are wrong? Or has he something that is impeachable?
And what do you think? So that's what the question was here. Do you think that the allegations in the whistleblower report and in Bill Taylor's testimony are enough to impeach the president, or do you think there's simply a partisan misunderstanding?
I think there has to be more details that come out. As of now, I don't think we've seen enough for me to jump one way or another and say he's completely innocent or he's completely guilty and should be removed. I think that I'm still waiting.
What more evidence would you hope to see?
I would hope to see more testimony from people who were involved in decision making. I'm not sure. I think there's been a lot of legal debate as to whether, simple quid pro quo is a impeachable offense. I still think we need more details. We need to wait on more to come out.
I think the difference here is, as Mick Mulvaney said, quid pro quo happens all the time in, dealing with other countries. And I think what the difference is here is, number one, that it was already congressionally appropriated money, and, Congress has the power of the purse, and just, that's $400 million. And I think also it was that what the trade was for, right? We've seen in American history where the United States has made deals with countries related to foreign aid on improving human rights or improving different conditions in countries as being a condition of aid. But election help is at least in my opinion, is not a valid request from the United States, especially because if you look at the investigation Ukraine already did into Hunter Biden, is that they stopped the investigation because there was no evidence of wrongdoing, right?
So I want to jump in here and just try to get to another point. So last week, House Representatives, House Republicans, they stormed the Sensitive Compartmented Information Facility, better known as the SCIF. It's a secure room in the Capitol basement where Congress goes to discuss highly classified issues and documents without fear of them getting out and leaking. Now led by Florida Republican Matt Gaetz, GOP lawmakers broke into this secure facility with their cell phones in hand, and it's an area that technology is not allowed, breaching security codes and putting U.S. national security at risk. So my question here is, do you think that this action by the Republicans, this defense to the impeachment inquiry, did this one go a step too far? It's fine if they want to go against it and say they don't support it, but did they step a little too far out of bounds in this movement? Diego, what do you think?
Oh, certainly. I think that was not the right way to protest. I understand the frustration. I do think, again, there needs to be more transparency. I think Pelosi seems to be more concerned with protecting her vulnerable members from taking hard votes, and that's a political calculation, not something that has to do with the actual merits of impeachment. But no, that is not the right way to go about these things. Again, like there are very clear rules for what you can do in those hearing rooms, and to take their cell phones into that, I think that was not something that I would do, nor that I would hope that any member of either party would do.
I concur. I think that there ought to be more transparency, but when you violate protocols like that put national security at risk, it was not wise, it was inappropriate, and they acted as if they were better than the American people, because if the American people tried to do that in the Capitol, they'd be arrested.
Now I want to get to one more question. If Trump is impeached in the House, because like we said, you need 218, right now they're at 228, do you think that there is any chance he'll be convicted in the Senate, or do you think that his loyalists will stay by his side? And what do you think it would take for those loyalists to go and get on the impeachment train? We'll throw it to the liberals first.
I mean, I think Mitch McConnell is going to continue to do what he has done as majority leader and not do his job in the Senate. We've seen legislation die in the Senate. There's not even debate on some of the bills that are widely agreed on by the American people. And I think he's going to do the same thing with impeachment. He's already said that he's not going to hold impeachment proceedings in the Senate. And I think it's a difference. We need to separate political responsibility from constitutional responsibility, and move forward with the process, because I think that for the Republicans, I think it would actually help them if they did have a trial where they proved that maybe the House impeached the president, but the Senate has a trial and take the partisanship out of it. It's like, listen, the evidence wasn't here for us to convict. Right?
Response from the right.
The partisanship's been there from the very beginning from the Democratic side. I think this has been a fairly partisan process this far. So to say, oh, now it's on McConnell to be neutral arbiter, I think is a little bit much. He has said he would hold the vote. He has said his understanding of Senate rules is if the House does pass articles of impeachment and votes on them, that they would be required to take them up. Again, the rules are a bit different. It doesn't have to be a month-long trial as it was with Bill Clinton. But I think he has said he would hold the vote, is what he has indicated so far.
I want to get one more quick question in. Charlie, you brought it up earlier when Mick Mulvaney was at the podium briefing the press, and he said that quid pro quos happen, quote, all the time, and he told the press corps to, quote, get over it. So we've seen that from Chief of Staff Mick Mulvaney, which he then walked back the next day. We've seen President Trump move from no collusion to no quid pro quo, in addition to his allies, and we see some House Republicans storming the skiff. So it seems like messaging to respond to impeachment is a bit all over the place. It's a bit disorganized. So what do you think the White House's strategy is here? Do you think that they're handling the impeachment well? Do you think that they need to kind of meet up, say this is our message, and then go out from there? What are your thoughts, Tara? I'm interested in hearing what you have to say.
Well, I think that there's a consistent pattern by the Republican Party to try and minimize the magnitude of things that are happening, and that the communication and the way that it's presented is obviously an attempt to minimize President Trump's crimes. And honestly, I just think that that's what this is a representation of.
A quick response from the Republicans. How is your party doing messaging?
I don't think they're doing a great job. Public opinion is slipping against them, obviously. I think what they need to do a better job of is actually going out and trying to do the job that they were elected to do. So they need to hold Democrats to account in their investigation, make sure it's transparent, but in a way that doesn't make themselves look like they're trying to be overly partisan. So that protest was a good example of it. They shouldn't be trying to obstruct the Democrats' thing for 5 hours, but they should have, done something to the effect of what Democrats do, and go out on the Capitol steps, get media attention, and go out and tell people what they're doing behind closed doors is not right.
All right. And we'll have to end our segment there, but after this, we'll shift over to international politics and discuss the escalating crisis in northern Syria. Stay tuned.
And this is GWTV.
Nailed that. Good job, guys.
Welcome back. Shifting gears now, let's head over to northern Syria, the region of the country that at one point was considered the most stable area in the nation, but has been proven to be quite the opposite these past 3 weeks. Let's lay out the facts. On October 13th, in a stunning and unexpected move, Defense Secretary Mark Esper announced that President Trump would be withdrawing American troops from Syria, opening up the opening up the territory to Syrian and Russian control, risking the resurgence of ISIS, and ultimately ditching our Kurdish allies, the very group that's credited with defeating ISIS. Now, it seems like a pretty destructive move, right? Well, looking straight past these repercussions, President Trump went ahead with removing the troops because he wanted to end an endless war and bring home his soldiers, which was met with opposition from both sides of the political aisle. But as we know, actions have repercussions, and that was absolutely the case here. Once American soldiers vacated the territory, Turkish forces unleashed on the Kurds, invading their land and launching attacks. Now, some context here. Turkey views the Kurds as militant group, the Kurdistan Workers' Party, or the PPK for short, as a terrorist group, hence the immediate attacks following the U.S.'s move. Now, President Trump, he tried to alleviate the tension by pulling back Turkish force through a series of sanctions. However, the fighting continued. It was continued until Vice President Pence and Secretary of State Mike Pompeo flew to Ankara, the Turkish capital, with hopes of brokering a deal and ending the fighting. And did they? Well, sort of, temporarily, for a mere 5 days. The international duo and President Erdogan of Turkey agreed to a temporary ceasefire, essentially a pause to the conflict after almost 5 hours of deliberation. This deal accepted Turkish military presence in the region as long as fighting halted for 5 days. Now, the vice president called the deal a, quote, solution we believe will save lives, only to be directly contradicted by Turkey's foreign minister, who said it was just a, quote, pause for our operation. Now, fast forward a few days to October 23rd, when on this day, a permanent ceasefire was agreed to in the region, prompting President Trump to lift his sanctions off Turkey. Clearly, there's a lot of material here, so let's jump right into it. The first question I want to ask, very simply, and at the beginning of this conversation and story, was President Trump's abrupt decision to pull troops from Syria justified? Was it a smart one? And mainly, what was his strategy here? Why exactly do you think he did this? Diego?
Well, it was a terrible decision. I think it was a very big betrayal of, as you said in your lead-in, of allies who fought ISIS with us, who did a lot of our dirty work when we didn't want to get involved. We didn't want to have to risk American soldiers. These are the people who are on the front lines, beating back ISIS, beating back terrorism, trying to secure and create a more stable area in an area of the world that just lacks stability and is constantly in chaos. So I don't know. I guess the reasoning is that we want to scale back endless wars, but it was, as you saw, a terrible decision that has led to atrocities, has led to the losing of countless lives, innocent lives, civilian lives. It should have never been made. And quite frankly, the United States, it speaks very poorly to our reputation internationally if we're going to ditch allies that have been as helpful as the Kurds for a decision like this. It is.
What do you guys think on the left?
And frankly, I think it's a selfish choice. I think a large part of his campaign at the beginning was the idea of, getting our troops out of foreign nations and all of this, and now we see impeachment proceedings and he's trying to gain favor again, and he's like, I guess I'll just bring these troops home. And it just showed absolutely no consideration for exactly what Diego said, all of the work that we did there, all of the lives we were trying to save, and now he pulls back these forces, which with, I believe, selfish intent to try and gain favor as impeachment proceedings go forward. It's disappointing.
So a question I want to bring in here is, usually when a president would make such a decision of this scale and this magnitude, he would consult his advisors, consult experts in the field to see what the best decision was. Well, the night before President Trump decided to withdraw troops from Syria, he consulted President Erdogan. So he was on a phone call with President Erdogan, and then the next day, President Trump makes this decision, and coincidentally, Turkish forces are ready on territory to go and strike. My question is, what do you think the nature of that phone call with Erdogan was? What was said in that phone call that could have prompted something of this magnitude and a movement of this size that was so catastrophic to the region? We can go to the liberals first.
Yeah, I think it's just another example of, Trump tries to, put himself up as a deal maker and as a businessman. And, this is just another example of when I think he caved to a foreign leader, as we've seen him do with Kim Jong-un, as we've seen him do with Vladimir Putin. And I think that, it also, he's ignoring, because obviously President Erdogan doesn't care, but he's ignoring the impacts of this conflict. Just in the few days since this conflict has started, we've seen 250,000 women and children displaced from their native homeland.
Well, I would just want to jump in there. I think President Erdogan does care about the decision that was made here because it gives him the power. it gives him the ability to finally go and push out the Kurds from the territory, go and fight the PPK. So I think that's an important idea.
What I mean is I don't
to
think he cares about the impact to civilians, women and children, right?
Okay,
I think
fair
he
enough.
sees this more as a political battle and as a military thing without recognizing the humanitarian impact, right? You know, you have these 250,000 women and children going into places in Iraq where the Kurds just finished battling ISIS, right? The region isn't necessarily secure. And I think that expecting, 250,000 people to just get up and move because that's what the Turkish government wants is unacceptable.
Patrick, what are your thoughts here? What do you think the nature of that call was? What was in there that started this mess?
I think that President Trump probably said to the effect of exactly that, he was going to be withdrawing the U.S. troops that were there. And while it wasn't a sizable force, right, it was only around 50 U.S. soldiers that were stationed in northern Syria, they were a deterrent to the Turkish going ahead and trying to force out, hundreds of thousands of people. So I think it was an unwise decision to call Erdogan and talk to him instead of sort of strategizing with his cabinet to make sure that we could do something to the effect to protect the Kurds who laid down their lives so that Americans didn't have to, and to, end ISIS.
So now if we look at the effects of this crisis, the effects of this situation, military intelligence is now suggesting that with this U.S. pullout, there'll be a significant power vacuum in the Middle East. So who do you think will fill that vacuum? I mean, there are possibilities of Turkey, Russia, Iran. Who do you think is going to now take that power and use it to their advantage? Charlie?
I think that what you're going to see in terms of the humanitarian crisis, you're going to see Iraq get more power because they now are, they're going to be going to other countries saying, we're taking on this responsibility and we need help. I think, Russia and Syria have already made a deal. Bashar al-Assad should not be the president of Syria. And I think it's just going to be an example of where, the new trio that is, Russia, Syria, and Iran is going to take advantage of this situation. And also, I think, take advantage of Turkey's position where they're both an ally to NATO and they're both an ally to the United States and the European Union, but also are willing to, accept favors from Russia, Iran, and Syria. And I think you're just going to see an example of, previous missteps by the United States in the Middle East where, is whether it was in Afghanistan or Iraq or as, we've seen in Libya, where it's like, we go in, we start a conflict, which, may or may not have good intentions, and then we leave, and then it's like we left without any infrastructure for governance afterwards. And I think that's what you're going to see here is that, the Kurdish people, that's their native land. And I think, in my opinion, they've earned the right to have their own country. And I think if we're going to abandon the Kurds on this same logic, the next, I think group on the list is like, then why doesn't the United States, stop their support for Taiwan?
So I want to jump in there because you did mention a point that I wanted to bring up. This is the Kurds' native land. This is where they come from. This is where they live. What happens to them now? Trump said go to the oil fields. They're being pushed off their homeland by Erdogan. What are they supposed to do? Was this decision realistic? Was it fair? What do you think, Charlie? What do you think, Patrick?
Republicans do want to get out of the Middle East. We're not, the United States has not been good at nation building. And while a lot of Republicans, including myself, are troubled by the way this was carried out, I don't know that it's for the United States to decide where the people in the Middle East live and their boundaries. I don't think that we should leave them for slaughter. I think absolutely we need to defend the Kurds in this crisis. But to suggest that we should be deciding who the president of Syria is or deciding the borders of a new Kurdish state, I think is a little bit rash. I think that the American people do not want us to be further involved in the Middle East. I think
What do you think on the left? I'm going to cut you off there. We're running out of time. What do you guys think on the left on that terms?
I think, the United States, I think, and it's not just the United States, I think the broader global community does have an option to be like, this is something wrong, right? Bashar al-Assad is a war criminal, right? He's attacked his own people with chemical weapons. And I think the United States and its allies should be able to say that is no longer acceptable, right?
Finish up. Quick.
Okay, and then, and I think again with the Kurdish people is that we need to recognize not only their ancestral claim, but the United States and other countries have, we've been an ally to the Kurds. We've them fighting ISIS for us was predicated on the idea that we would support them having their own independent nation, and then to come back years later and be like, see you later, figure this all out, and then also you have a whole country's army up against you, right? And the thing too is that the Kurdish people don't have genuine support from the Syrians either. So now they're stuck in the middle. On one side they have a civil war, and on the other side they have the president of Turkey who wants to see them all slaughtered.
One more point I want to bring up. As mentioned before, there has been pretty swift backlash amongst Republicans against the U.S.'s withdrawal from Syria. In fact, just over 2 weeks ago, Lindsey Graham had this to say in a phone interview with Fox and Friends.
I expect the American president to do what's in our national security interest. And it's never in our national security interest to abandon an ally who's helped us fight ISIS. It's never in our national security interest to create the conditions for the reemergence of ISIS.
In addition to that, Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell filed a resolution to officially condemn the U.S.'s withdrawal. Now the question is this indicative of anti-Trump sentiments forming among GOP members, or are these just outstanding circumstances? Charlie, what do you think?
I think I don't agree with Senator Lindsey Graham on a lot of things, but I think he was right in this instance. As I've said before, I just think it's inappropriate to, leave our allies behind, especially in such a hostile environment as this. And I just think that, this will be another instance, whether it was, Vietnam or the Iraq War, where we're going to go back 10 years from now and be able to see the mistake we made and the human impact that this had, whether it's a refugee crisis, whether it's war crimes, human rights violations, things like that. And I think this will just be another example where the United States made a mistake.
And unfortunately, I don't necessarily think that just because Lindsey Graham has disagreed with Trump on this one thing, I don't think that it's necessarily an indication that the Republican Party is starting to turn on Trump. I think that Trump has done a lot of preposterous things, and there's a loyalty there, and I don't necessarily think that this is an indication that is going to change.
Patrick, what do you think?
Yeah, no, I would say that I think Lindsey Graham is pushing back on the president because he thinks he's making a mistake, but I don't think that necessarily translates to he's going to vote to impeach the president or break from him in a significant way. And not necessarily should he. I mean, the role of Congress is, of course, to hold the president to account, but not necessarily to impeach him on the Syria issue. I don't think anyone would be suggesting that Republicans should break away from him over this.
So in a lot of this debate, we've mentioned that temporary ceasefire. Well, after the 5 days were up, Turkey agreed to extend the ceasefire in Syria indefinitely, and with this, President Trump decided to lift the sanctions that he had placed on Turkey. He took them off. So my question here is, was this the right move, and how exactly does this affect U.S. diplomatic pressure in the Middle East? Patrick, Diego, we'll go to you first.
Yeah, I mean, it shouldn't have had happened in the first place, I guess, is the most fundamental thing. We shouldn't have to be in this position where the vice president and secretary of state had to travel to negotiate these things. Going forward, it's going to be very difficult. I mean, the loss of life, the displacement, as was mentioned earlier, of these thousands of people, that's a reality that the United States has a responsibility to play a role in. I understand that there are a lot of Republicans, or people from both parties actually, in general, who are kind of tired of always being involved in the Middle East. I understand that, but when you're a superpower, you have responsibilities. You have a sort of moral responsibility to help out some of these people that are in need, who are the victims of some war crimes, who have been targeted for their religion, for their ethnicity specifically. So I don't know exactly what that looks like, but if that was working through the UN or working through NATO, but the United States has to play a role in making sure that, at the very minimum, no further damage is done, and ideally that some of this is able to be rectified, however difficult that may be.
One more quick response from the left, and then we'll have to wrap it up.
Yeah, I was going to say, I also want to be clear, when we're talking about this case in particular, we're not talking about asserting ourselves in the Middle East. We're talking about exiting appropriately. We're not talking about over-asserting ourselves more than we already are in there. It's about not making an overnight decision to call to the Turkish president and then pulling, 1,000 troops out. It's about managing, with all of our experience as a nation, it's about managing that exit appropriately and making sure that that exit goes smoothly to avoid all of this death and displacement and all of that. And so it's more about exiting appropriately than how much to assert ourselves.
All right, and we'll have to end that conversation there. But after this break, it's rapid fire. Stay with us.
Do you want to just practice fake headlines, do our anchor voices?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah?
Okay.
On this week's episode of G Week, there is another election scandal.
And former Vice Provost Peter Kay has been spotted back on campus rocking a brand new bandana. Boy, does he look sharp.
And this year's Spring Fling performer is anticipated to be none other than the Cash Me Outside girl, Behad Behabi.
Catch all this and more on G Week.
Yeah, this is stuff that would probably happen at GW.
Yeah, I think so too.
Our panel joins us again now for Rapid Fire, some quick answers to some quick questions. And first up, we'll take a look at the topic everyone loves talking about, 2020. On October 15th, Democrats took the stage in Westerville, Ohio, for what was the largest debate in modern presidential history. 12 candidates stood alongside one another for 3 long, grueling hours debating top issues. Now, this debate, coming as the Dem field begins to take shape, but also fluctuates a bit. Just last week, another candidate, Tim Ryan, dropped out of the race, bringing the field down to 18 contenders. And new poll numbers are showing changes at the top of the field, with Senator Elizabeth Warren surpassing Senator Bernie Sanders for second place, going for VP Biden's frontrunner title. Now, Senator Warren's surge has been coupled with increased scrutiny, especially on her stance for Medicare for All. On the debate stage, the progressive Massachusetts senator was pressed by her competitors on how she will pay for her sweeping healthcare initiative, specifically by Mayor Pete Buttigieg. Now, Warren brands herself as the candidate who has a plan for everything, but she seems to have lost the blueprints for this one, pivoting to her "I'm with Bernie on this" answer. Following the debate, the Warren campaign said they are exploring funding options for the initiative and that they'd announce it soon. So my question here is, and Charlie will come to you first, why did the Warren camp say that they will release an initiative to pay for this plan? Do you really think that they have not thought this through yet? Warren is, like I said, the candidate who has a plan for everything. Is it possible that she didn't have a plan of how to pay for Medicare for All?
You know, I think what we're seeing here is, like, my opinion is that her campaign knows what the plan is. It's just that, you know, what needs to get through the mind of the American people, and I think it's what, you know, why Bernie Sanders lost a lot of support, is that while through a Medicare for All plan, taxes will go up, you know, you won't be paying those out-of-pocket healthcare costs that constitute up to 20 to 24% of a lot of American family spending. And, you know, instead you'll see an increase in taxes, and I think that's what it is they want to get away, because, you know, Americans hate taxes, but they love healthcare. And so it's, I think, how do we explain the issue? And I think what's also important to note is I think that a lot of, you know, kind of the more scandalous moments of the debate came from people who are polling low, right? My opinion is that at this point, you know, especially with, you know, caucuses and primaries starting early next year, if you're polling at 0%, 1%, 2%, it's time to drop out and, you know, help the Democratic Party, you know, win not only in the House and the Senate, but also the White House. I think, you know, when you look at fundraising, you know, which Tara and I is working for a political action committee, you know, fundraising is really important. All of the Democratic contenders combined do not match Trump and the Republican National Committee when it comes to fundraising. And, you know, we can talk about getting money out of politics, but campaigns cost money. And, you know, I think a lot of this debating and attacking each other not only wastes time, but also wastes resources overall.
Tara, what are your thoughts here?
So as a student of public health, healthcare is like my number one priority right now in the election and my interest. I'm frankly curious to see Warren's plans, because the first thing I want is everyone to be covered, you know, within a healthcare system. What that looks like, you know, every candidate has a different opinion, and frankly, like, my priority is getting people covered within a patchwork system. And, you know, when people like Bernie and Warren come in with these really sweeping promises of covering everyone within healthcare, you know, we have people who've been in the healthcare trenches forever trying to get coverage for everybody. And I genuinely am curious, like, what a Medicare for All option will look like financially and where that funding will come from. And I'm hoping, in order for Warren at least to garner my support, I would need to see those blueprints. And so I am wondering where they are, especially since, you know, a sweeping promise is amazing, but after 4 years, who's going to be covered? How many more people are going to be covered?
Patrick, what do you think about this?
Yeah, no, I think Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders are getting wary that the American people are tired of the whole bait and switch. We're going to raise your taxes, but somehow lower your healthcare costs. And in the end, that just never happens. I mean, you see this in Canada, you see this in other countries, that they even claim as their models, right? So I think Elizabeth Warren should release her plan, because, you know, if she doesn't, it's going to look suspect.
Diego, you're shaking your head.
Yeah, no, I mean, you're seeing a lot of this cycle from the Democrats as they try to, you know, run to who can be the farthest to the left. And, you know, unfortunately, or fortunately, I think for the country, it's not good. You know, your average American has to live within its means. It can't, you know, make plans and make vacation plans it can't pay for. And so, you know, Senator Warren should be held to those same standards. She's going to propose something. She should be expected to answer exactly how she'll pay for it. And clearly she doesn't have an answer right now. And unfortunately, you see a lot of that from the Democratic Party these days.
All right, next up, we'll head up to the Great White North, where Canadians just visited the ballot box re-electing Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, but with a twist. While, yes, he did win the election, his party, the Liberal Party, lost its majority. While it did take more seats than anyone else in the parliament, the Liberal Party was 13 seats short of the 170-seat threshold needed for a majority. Now, Trudeau will have to work with the opposition party to get any sort of legislation passed. So I think the question here is, what do you think this says about the global political climate in Canada and maybe larger in the world?
I think it showed that Canadians were although not ready to completely get rid of the Trudeau government, they have been a little bit disappointed by his lack of follow through on some of his big promises that he's made. His flip flops a little bit on whether he's for all these environmental policies or whether he's going to support the oil industry, which is why he lost a lot of support in rural Canada. Internationally, we'll see. I mean, obviously he's going to have a lot more instability as to what he can do, how much leeway he can have. I think the big thing is this was a significant improvement for the Conservative Party of Canada on the last election, and it sets them up in a good position to take power in the next elections. I don't see this lasting very long. Personally, I think there's a lot of policy differences between the parties, the more liberal parties in Canada, that might bring down this government sooner rather than later.
Patrick?
And that's the thing, is that Canada has had a lot of minority governments, and they don't last very long. It won't be more than a couple years before we see another election. And I think, frankly, Justin Trudeau has failed to deliver on the mandate he was given, because he's given rise to the separatists, the Bloc Québécois in Quebec, and he's driven jobs out of Alberta and Saskatchewan. He's let people on both sides of the political spectrum, both sides of the country down, and I think he's not going to be there for very long. The Conservatives won the most votes, and they are the strongest opposition party in the history of Canada, so I think they'll be in power soon.
Tara, what are your thoughts on Canada?
I think regardless of how long Trudeau is in office, I think that his position now, working in a coalition where he's no longer a part of the majority, is really going to require a prioritization of all the things that they can agree on, and is going to require moving forward as a government in a way that as long as you don't have a majority, you're going to be working with a lot of the different parties in a positive way. And I think that honestly, that kind of approach can have a lot of potential suggestions for the U.S. and other countries as well, just prioritizing the things you can agree on and the things you all care about. Just like in America, we want people to be covered by healthcare. How can we do it?
Charlie?
Yeah, I think the Trudeau administration has already announced that they're making no formal deal with other parties, and it's going to be about coalition building. They've already said that when Trudeau met with party leaders, they all agreed that they can take action on climate change and they can take action on cost of living. And I think if they start doing legislative work on both those issues, you'll see an improvement in the quality of life in Canada. And as Tara mentioned, I think how they operate in this environment, I think, can be a good example for the United States to look at. The Democratic majority in the House is not very big. The Republican majority in the Senate is also not that large either. I mean, no group has a supermajority, and I think that while we do have divisive political figures on both sides, I won't deny that. I think that among this divisive time, we can still look for cooperation. Like I know this week, the House passed a bill, making animal cruelty a felony, right? And so we can get to those kind of common sense issues, and common sense gun reform and things like that, and take action regardless of the divisive political climate.
All right, and now it is no question that this city is quite the political town. Everyone's either a congressional staffer, a lobbyist, a hill turn, but I think we've finally found a race that has trumped, no pun intended, the excitement for the 2020 race, and that's the World Series, the Washington Nationals versus the Houston Astros. Now, this is the first time the Nationals have made a World Series berth, and you bet fans are excited. So, will the Nationals be able to pull out a win and bring home the victory to the district? Jump in. What do you guys think? Baseball fans here?
Oh, hell yeah. Yeah. No, Nats are coming
Nats
through.
have it?
No questions asked.
Yeah, I mean, they're already 2-0. I think that also we've just seen a great performance from the Nationals this season, and I hope that they continue it.
Yeah, no, I mean, they looked really good last game. They're looking really good going into the weekend. Hopefully they'll be able to wrap it up here in Washington, so we'll be able to, have a nice big celebration. Maybe classes canceled for the parade. I don't know.
That'd be nice.
Hopefully, I mean, it is. We'll see how about that. But I mean, when the Capitals won, this city, everyone kind of came together and was able to celebrate that. So it's a good common ground, I guess, after all the divisiveness going on right now, to focus on something we can all agree on, and it's the District of Champions pulling out of the win here.
Yeah, after
Agreed?
Yeah, agreed. The happiest my professors have ever been. So
Let's keep them happy.
Baseball is bipartisan. Love it.
Yes.
All right, we'll have to end things there. But Charlie, But Charlie, Tara, Patrick, Diego, thank you guys so much for coming out here today, talking with us, debating these important issues. When we come back, Willow Hassan has our debate fact check. Stay with us.
Hi, Colonials. Did you know there are hundreds of ways for you to volunteer with GW? Each year, over 1,500 alumni, parents, and friends contribute thousands of hours to make our community stronger. There are countless ways you can volunteer, so it's easy to choose an opportunity that is most meaningful to you, like connecting with students and alumni based on your student involvement, identity, or personal interests. Getting involved with your local alumni network. Mentoring a current student via our online mentoring platform. Connecting with prospective students through undergraduate admissions opportunities. Serving on an industry network leadership council. Becoming a social media ambassador. The list goes on. No matter where you are in the world or how much time you have to give, you can connect and volunteer with GW. And the best part, it's easy to get involved. Just visit alumni.gwu.edu/volunteer to learn more about these and other opportunities. Because of your service to GW, you are able to make a direct impact on the lives of former, current, and future students. We look forward to working with you. Raise high.
Welcome back. During our panel discussion, a team of fact checkers monitor our debate. Willow Hassan is here to fill us in on what we missed. Willow?
Thanks, Michael. Our debaters came prepared for today's debate with very few errors. However, some false claims need to be addressed. Democrat Charlie Panfil claimed that Mitch McConnell said he won't hold a vote on impeachment in the Senate. However, McConnell has actually said that he wants to hold the Senate trial and an official vote by the end of the year. Charlie also repeatedly said that 250,000 people were displaced after U.S. troops were removed from northern Syria. This is roughly accurate, but should be clarified that recent reporting suggests as many as 300,000 people have been displaced by Turkey's military operation, many of whom are from Kurdish and Christian communities. Republican Patrick Berland said that 50 U.S. soldiers were stationed in northern Syria. While estimates vary and official Defense Department numbers are classified, the U.S. has previously stationed between 1,000 and 1,100 troops. Patrick also said that Democratic candidates combined don't meet Trump and the RNC's fundraising. In fact, Trump and the RNC have raised $308 million in 2019. The Democratic candidates combined have raised $344.7 million. That's all from the Fact Check team. Back to you, Michael.
Thanks, Willow. All right, well, that's all for this episode of Colonial Crossfire. Be sure to check us out online at www.gw-tv.com and follow us on Twitter and Instagram and like us on Facebook. And if you have strong political beliefs and want to voice them to the GW community, please reach out to the Crossfire team via email or social media. We would love to have you on the show. For all of us here at GW TV, I'm Michael Schnell. Thanks for getting caught in the crossfire with us. We'll see you right back here next time.